So would you be okay with, just hypothetically, if Trump took 1,000 criminals and there's, let's say, an 80% chance that one of them's, will do capital punishment on all these people, but there's a chance that one of them's innocent. Would you take that risk?
Yes, if understanding that there are no perfect systems, you have to make laws and rules.
Now, the fact that you, who's an expert on this matter, aren't actually entirely aware of the specific conditions of the law or exactly what it's called, to me demonstrate that to some extent there's a disregard for the state of law and the due process.
Well, that's what he's doing.
So would you be okay with, just hypothetically, if Trump took 1,000 criminals and there's, let's say, an 80% chance that one of them's innocent, and he said, okay, we're gonna, we'll do capital punishment on all these people, but there's a chance that one of them's innocent. Would you take that risk? I think that's a fair question, and you can disagree, but I think that's a fair question.
I don't think it's an unfair question. Again, I mean, I think I already answered that. Like every now and then, every now and then, say yes. Hold on, let me answer. Every now and again, someone is going to get caught up in some of these things. So if you arrest 1,000 people, is it possible that 999 of them absolutely are guilty and there's some confusion around one of them and someone gets caught up? Yeah, but also, we're not putting these people to death. Right now, we're just sending, a lot of them we're sending out of the country. So you also brought capital punishment in there, which is a separate issue altogether. Look.
Analogy, right? A structural analogy. A thought experiment.
Sorry?
More as a thought experiment, would you apply the same logic, was rather my question.
Yes, if understanding that there are no perfect systems, you have to make laws and rules. You have to apply them, and you hopefully apply them to the best of your ability. Within understanding that, is it possible that 1 out of 1,000 people could get caught up in this and that's a problem? Yeah, of course that's true. Of course, there's no perfect system. And generally, liberty-minded people don't pretend there's a perfect system. It's usually people on the left that think if you just give the system enough power, the system will be benevolent and perfect for everybody. So I would say it's a risk you have to take. If you are going to deport people, if you would like your country to remain British, which likely it will not be in any way that we can sort of convey what Britishness means in 20 years, you're going to have to deport people.
Okay, let's talk specifically about how it's being done then, because despite the possibility of mistake, things have to be done in the right way. Now, speaking about the sort of Venezuelan gangs that you mentioned, the method by which they were deported, which brought up a lot of controversy with regards to the attempt to block that or suspend that, at least for the time being, by a certain judge. The attempt to do that without due process, and this is legal fact, relied upon the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. So to give our viewers, I'm sure you know it, Dave, but to give our viewers an idea of that, that is supposed to be only invoked in periods of war where the people concerned come from a country actively at war at the US. Now, the US tried to deport circa 200 people. They did so. Those were primarily Venezuelan. Yet the Venezuelan president, Maduro, agreed to take those gangs, right? The president, the head of state. So Venezuela is clearly not at war with the US, and yet the act being invoked in order to deport these people without due process relies on the US being at war with that country. So for me, there's a clear case of disingenuousness there and misuse of law. Well, what's your opinion on that?
So, well, the administration's argument is that we are at some level of war with these gangs. No one's arguing that we're at war with
the law. The law is at war with the country. The law requires you be at war with the country.
Yeah, look, I believe in due process, absolutely. I don't necessarily believe that illegals here deserve the exact same due process that everyone else does. If we allowed for every time we get an illegal here who we know is a gang member and maybe brought in fentanyl or raped a woman or something else, and then we had to get that hung up in courts constantly, nothing would ever happen. That's just reality. So I suspect that this issue about the war power or the alien, what's it called? Not the War Powers Act.
The Alien Enemies Act.
The Alien Enemies Act. I suspect that some of this will get caught up in courts over the terminology of technically, are you at war? You know, the president's allowed. The president
allowed a technicality. Would you say that America's at war with Venezuela? I think it's more than a technicality. Would you kind of concede
Well,
that
I
point?
just said America's not at war with Venezuela, but I think you absolutely can argue that we are at, look, at some point, if China just keeps sending people through Mexico with fentanyl to kill our kids, whether we declare war or not, we are at war. So there's a difference between sort of like the actual declarative statement of what a war is, and then there's also every country's right to defend its sovereign borders.
But you agree that when we're interpreting law, and we should do so strictly, even if we're trying to get things done, we can't take a metaphorical interpretation of what war is, right? We have to be, or sorry, Americans have to be at war with Venezuela in order for that to be legal on the basis of a law passed all the way back in 1798. So you can say, first of all, in a general way, but by law that would make it illegal, right?
I'm not a big fan of just saying, oh my God, something was passed a long time ago, so it's somehow inherently bad.
Well, I mean, it's, you respect
the Constitution was ratified a long time ago. The Declaration came a long time ago. You guys,
you respect standards of law in the U.S., right?
et cetera, et cetera. Look, we can whittle the argument down to, okay, is there a way to sort of declare war against a terrorist organization or a gang or a bunch of fentanyl dealers? And how do we whittle that away from the war of a country? I haven't heard anyone, including anyone in the administration, saying we're at war with Venezuela. What I know is that Donald Trump ran on, we are going to get the drug dealers and the rapists and criminals off the street, and that's exactly what he's doing, which is why most Americans are completely for this. If tomorrow they were just showing up at random Walmarts to grab grandma out of nowhere, that would be a problem, obviously. But doing what they're doing right now, there was no other way. There was literally no other way.
Right, well, look, but the judge actually who tried to block this only wanted to suspend it to make sure, and this is usually a process, particularly on such high-profile cases that would have only taken a few days. In fact, the order was going to come through the next day. The order was going to come through the next day to review that, right? So the judge that blocked that was only wanting to check through proper legal due process that the Alien Enemies Act was legitimate in that regard. Now, the fact that you, who's an expert on this matter, aren't actually entirely aware of the specific conditions of the law or exactly what it's called, to me demonstrate that to some extent there's a disregard for the state of law and the due process.
Well, I mean, you're framing that question in like an absurdly obnoxious way. I didn't sit here pretending that I'm a lawyer. I'm telling you what my opinions are on the matter. Also, as it pertains to the next commentator, right? As it pertains to the law, as it pertains to the flight, apparently the flight was already over international waters. And even that aside, the broader issue, if you want to talk about sort of the struggle as it pertains to the legal issues at the moment, the real issue is that right now the problem that we're having in America is, can any lower level judge decide that he can overrule the president? That's what the real struggle in our separation of powers is about right now. Trump is doing some things. If he did something that is truly illegal, that has to basically get up to the Supreme Court and they can stop him from doing it, right? That's the judicial branch saying that the executive branch is doing something illegal. What seems to be happening across the board right now is that lower level circuit judges, random judges that you've never heard of, are basically saying, I'm more powerful than the presidency. That is the judicial I would say crisis or tension that we're dealing with right now. I mean, you're framing that question in like an absurdly obnoxious way.
So Venezuela is clearly not at war with the US, and yet the act being invoked in order to deport these people without due process relies on the US being at war with that country.
Largely, I'm very against executive actions. I would say very vocal about that for many, many years. Trump came in, did a bunch of executive actions as it pertained to the border.
What's something that you agree with on the left side of things?